and I wanted to really talk about was when I made this channel, I really wanted to focus on kind of reading whatever that came to mind, and that could be any and all books that would come up. So I didn't want it to just be like manga or comics. In order to continue that, I am going to today read a Penguins classic, a book that I personally really, really love, and is very, very, very well known. I am going today to read William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. I love this book, and I love the story, and I love everything to do with it. I believe this is the screenplay version, maybe. So it might just be dialogue. And if it ends up being boring, that's good, because it means you'll go to sleep much faster. To this will be lighting a already used doofy lavender or lavendel. It's lavender. So this is what we'll light to read. And for that, I have my trusty green Royce lighter. I think the name is Royce. Anyway, it's a good lighter. So let's light. That was quick. Candle is lit. I'll set that to the side here, and hopefully it's still in view. So, let us begin reading William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Let's read the back first. Shakespeare invented the human as we continue to know it, said Harold Bloom. Set in the city torn apart by feuds and gang warfare, Shakespeare's immortal drama tells the story of star-crossed lovers, rival dynasties, and bloody revenge. Romeo and Juliet is a hymn or hymn to youth and the thrill of forbidden love, charged with sexual passion and violence, but also a warning of death. A dazzling combination of bawdy comedy and high tragedy, used and recommended by the National Theatre. So the front cover is detail from Portrait of a Girl by Sir John Everett Millais in 1857. Leicester Galleries, London, Bridgman Images. Why is that the picture used? Good question. I don't know. But that is the book which we will now proceed to read. William Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. There are the contents of the book. So we'll begin with the general introduction. Every play by Shakespeare is unique. This is part of his greatness, a restless and indefatigable experimenter. He moved with a rare amalgamation of artistic integrity and dedicated professionalism from one kind of drama to another, never shackled by convention. He offered his actors the alternation between serious and comic modes, from play to play, and often also within the plays themselves, that the repertory system within which he worked demanded that, and which provided an invaluable stimulus to his imagination. Introductions to individual works in this series attempted to find their individuality, but there are common factors that underpin Shakespeare's career. Nothing in his Hereditary offers clues to the origins of his genius. His upbringing in Stratford-upon-Avon, where he was born in 1564, was unexceptional. His mother, born Mary Arden, came from a prosperous farming family. Her father chose her as his executor over her 8 sisters and his 4 step-children when she was only in her late teens, which suggests that she was of more than average practical ability. Her husband John, a glover, apparently unable to write, was nevertheless a capable businessman and loyal townsfellow, who seems to have fallen on relatively hard times in later life. He would have been brought up as a Catholic and may have retained Catholic sympathies, but his son subscribed publicly to the Anglicanism throughout his life. The most important formative influence on Shakespeare was his school. As the son of an alderman who became bailiff in 1568, he had the right to attend the town's grammar school. Here he would have received an education grounded in classical rhetoric and oratory, studying authors Latin from his early years. This classical education permeates Shakespeare's work from the beginning to the end of his career. It is apparent in the self-conscious classicism of plays of the early 1590s, such as the tragedy of Didius Androcynus, the comedy of Errors, and the narrative poems of Venus and Adonis, the rape of Lucrece, and is still evident in his latest plays, informing the dream visions of Pericles and Cymbeline, and the Mask and the Tempest, written between 1607 and 1611. It inflects his literary style throughout his career. In his earliest writings, the verse based on the 10-syllabled, 5-beat iambic pentameter is highly patterned. Rhetorical devices derived from classical literature, such as alliterations and antithesis, extended smiles, and elaborate wordplay around, often as in Love's Labours Lost and A Midsummer's Night's Dream. He uses rhyming patterns associated with lyrical poetry. Each line contained incense, the prose as well as the verse, employing elaborate figures of speech. Writing at a time of linguistic ferment, Shakespeare frequently imports Latinisms into English, coining words such as abstemious, addiction, incarnadine, and adjunct. He was also heavily influenced by the eloquent translations of the Bible in both the bishops and the Geneva versions. As his experience grows, his verse and prose become more supple, the patterning less apparent, more ready to accommodate the rhythms of ordinary speech, more colloquial in diction, as in the speeches of the nurse in Romeo and Juliet. The characterful prose of Falstaff and Hamlet's soliloquies. The effect is of increasing psychological realism, reaching its greatest heights in Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, and Antony and Cleopatra. Gradually, he discovered ways of adapting the regular beat of the pentameter to make it an infinitely flexible instrument for matching through with feeling. Towards the end of his career, in plays such as The Winter's Tale, Cymbeline, and The Tempest, he adopts a more highly mannered style, in keeping with the more overtly symbolical and emblematical mode in which he is writing. So far as we know, Shakespeare lived in Stratford till after his marriage to Anne Hathaway, 8 years his senior in 1582. They had 3 children, a daughter, Suzanne, born in 1583, within 6 months of their marriage, and twins, Hamnet and Judith, born in 1585. The next 7 years of Shakespeare's life are virtually a blank. Theories that he may have been, for instance, a schoolmaster, or a lawyer, or a soldier, or a sailor, lack evidence to support them. The first reference to him in print in Robert Greene's pamphlet, Greene's Groatsworth of Wit of 1592, parodies a line from Henry VI, Part 3, implying that Shakespeare was already an established playwright. It seems likely that at some unknown point after the birth of his twins, performances, and London. The London theatres closed because of plague in 1593 and 94. And during these years, perhaps recognizing the need for an alternative career, he wrote and published narrative poems, Venus and Adonis, and The Rape of Lucrece. These are the only works we can be certain that Shakespeare himself was responsible for putting into print. Each bears the author's dedication to Henry Wriothesley, Earl of Southampton, the second in warmer terms than the first. Southampton, younger than Shakespeare by 10 years, is the only person to whom he personally dedicated works. The Earl may have been a close friend, perhaps even the beautiful and adored young man whom Shakespeare celebrates in his sonnets. The resumption of playing after the plague years saw the founding of the Lord Chamberlain's Men, a company to which Shakespeare was to belong for the rest of his career as actors, shareholder, and playwright. No other dramatist of the period had so stable a relationship with a single company. Shakespeare knew the actors for whom he was writing and the conditions in which they performed. The permanent company was made up of around 12 to 14 players, but one actor often played more than one role in a play, and additional actors were hired as needed. Led by the tragedian Richard Burbage and initially the comic actor Will Kemp, they rapidly achieved a high reputation, and when King James succeeded Queen Elizabeth I in 1603, they renamed as the King's Men. All the women's parts were played by boys. There is no evidence that any female role was ever played by a male actor over the age of about 18. Shakespeare had enough confidence in his boys to write them long and demanding roles, such as Rosalind, who, like other heroines of the romantic comedies, is disguised as a boy for much of the action in As You Like It, Lady Macbeth, and Cleopatra. But there are far more fathers and mothers, sons than daughters in his plays. Few, if any, of them require more than the company's normal complement of 3 or 4 boys. The company played primarily in London's public playhouse, where there were almost none that we know of in the rest of the country. Initially in the theatre built in Shoreditch in 1576, and from 1599 in the Globe on Bankside. These were wooden, more or less circular structures open to the air, with a thrust stage surmounted by a canopy and jutting into the area where spectators who paid 1 penny stood, and surrounded by galleries where it was possible to be seated on payment of an additional penny. Through properties such as cauldrons, stocks, artificial trees, or beds could indicate locality, there was no representational scenery. Sound effects such as flourishes of trumpets, music both martial and amorous, and accompaniments to songs were provided by the company's musicians. Actors entered through doors in the back wall of the stage. Above it was a balconied area that could represent the walls of a town, as in King John, or a castle, as in Richard II, and indeed a balcony, as in Romeo and Juliet. In 1609, the company also acquired the use of Blackfriars, a small indoor theatre to which admission was more expensive, and which permitted the use of more spectacular stage effects such as the descent of Jupiter on an eagle in Cymbeline, and of goddesses in The Tempest. They would frequently perform before the court in royal residences and on their regular tours into the provinces, in non-theatrical spaces such as inns, guildhall, and the great halls of country houses. Early in his career, Shakespeare may have worked in collaboration, perhaps with Thomas Nash in Henry VI, Part 1, and with George Peele in Titus Andronicus, and towards the end he collaborated with George Wilkins in Pericles, and with his younger colleagues Thomas Middleton in Timon of Athens, and John Fletcher in Henry VIII, The Two Noble Kinsmen, and The Lost Play Cardenio. Shakespeare's output dwindled in his last years, and he died in 1616 in Stratford, where he owned a fine house, new place, and much land. His only son had died at the age of 11 in 1596, and his last descendant died in 1670. New Place was destroyed in the 18th century, but the other Stratford houses associated with his life are maintained and displayed to the public by the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. One of the most remarkable features of Shakespeare's plays is their intellectual and emotional scope. They span a great range from the lightest of comedies, such as The Two Gentlemen of Verona and The Comedy of Errors, to the profoundest of tragedies, such as King Lear and Macbeth. He maintained an output of around 2 plays a year, ringing the changes between comic and serious. All his comedies have serious elements. Shylock in The Merchants of Venice almost reach tragic dimensions, and Measure for Measure is profoundly serious in its examination of moral problems. Equally, none of his tragedies is without humor. Hamlet is as witty as any of his comic heroes. Macbeth has its border, and King Lear its fool. His greatest comic character, Falstaff, inhabits the history plays, and Henry V ends with a marriage, while Henry VI Part 3rd, Richard II, and Richard III culminate in the tragic deaths of their protagonists. Although in performance, Shakespeare's characters can give the impression of a subperdant reality. He is not a naturalistic dramatist. None of his plays is explicitly set in his own time. The action of few of them, except for the English theories, is set even partly in England. Italy is his favored location. Most of his principal storylines derived from printed writings, but the structure and translation of these narratives into dramatic terms is Shakespeare's own, and he invents much additional material. Most of the plays contain elements of myth and legend, and many derive from ancient or more recent history, or from romantic tales of ancient times and faraway places. All reflect his reading, often in close detail. Holnished Chronicles, a great compendium of English, Scottish, and Irish history, provided material for his English history plays. The lives of the noble Grecians and Romans by the Greek French by Sir Thomas North in 1579, provided much of the narrative material and also a mass of verbal detail for his plays about Roman history. Some plays are closely based on shorter individual works, as You Like It, for instance, on the novel Rosalind by his near contemporary Thomas Lodge, The Winter's Tale on Pantosto by old rival Robert Greene, and Otello on a story by the Italian Giraldi Cinthio, and the language of his plays is permeated by the Bible, the Book of the Common Prayer, and the proverbial sayings of his day. Shakespeare was popular with his contemporaries, but his commitment to the theatre and to the plays in performance is demonstrated by the fact that only about half of back volumes known as quartos appeared in prints in his lifetime. In slim paper back volumes known as quartos, so called because they were made from printer's sheets folded twice to form 4 leaves. None of them shows any signs that he was involved in their publication. For him, performance was the primary means of publication. The most frequently reprinted of his works were the non-dramatic poems, the erotic Venus and Adonis, and the more moralistic, The Rape of Lucrece. I think this was quite a lot to read, especially since these pages feel like they go on forever. But I wanted to just briefly read a bit of the introduction as a comeback video of Shakespeare before, if I continue with this, we can move on to the actual, which is on to there, but that's still the chronology. So we can continue this and then finish up with the general introduction. The sonnets, which appeared in 1609 under his name but possibly without his consent, were less successful, perhaps because the vogue for sonnet sequences, which peaked in the 1590s, had passed by then. They were not reprinted until 1640, and then only in garbled form along with poems by other writers. Happily, in 1623, 7 years after he died, his colleague John Hemmings and Henry Condell published his collected plays, including 18 that had not previously appeared in print in the first folio, whose name derives from the fact that the printer's sheets were folded only once to produce 2 leaves. Some of the quarto editions are badly printed, and the fact that some plays exist in 2 or even 3 early versions creates problems for editors. These are discussed in the account of the text in each volume of this series. Shakespeare's plays continued in the repertoire until the Puritans closed the theatre in 1642, when performances resumed after the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. Many of the plays were not to the taste of the times, especially because their mingling of genres and failures to meet the requirements of poetic justice offended against the dictates of neoclassicism. Some, such as The Tempest, King Lear, and Richard III, were extensively rewritten. Others fell into neglect. Slowly they regained their place in the repertoire, and they continued to be reprinted. But it was not until the great actor David Garrick organized a spectacular jubilee in Stratford, 1769, that Shakespeare began to be regarded as a transcendental genius. Garrick's idolatry prefigured the enthusiasm of critics such as Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Hazlitt. Gradually, Shakespeare's reputation spread abroad to Germany, America, France, and to other European countries. During the 19th century, though the plays were generally still performed in heavily adapted or abbreviated versions, a large body of scholarship and criticism began to amass, partly as a result of a general swing in education away from the teachings of Greek and Roman texts and towards literature written in English. Shakespeare became the object of intensive study in schools and universities. In the theatre, important turning points were the work in England of 2 theatre directors, William Bowell and his disciple Harley Parker, who showed that the application of knowledge, some of it newly acquired, of early staging conditions to performance of the plays could render the original text viable in terms of the modern theatre. During the 20th century, appreciation appreciation of Shakespeare's works, encouraged by the availability of audio, film, and video versions of the plays spread around the world to such an extent that he can now be claimed as a global author. The influence of Shakespeare's works permeates the English language, phrases from his plays and poems, and Hour of Strength, The Green-Eyed Jealousy, A Foregone Conclusion, are on the lips of people who may never have read him. They have inspired composers of songs, orchestral music, and operas, painters and sculptors, poets, novelists, and filmmakers. Allusions to him appear in pop songs and advertisements and in television shows. Some of his characters, Romeo and Juliet, Falstaff, Shylock, and Hamlet, have acquired mythic status. He is valued for his humanity, his psychological insight, his wit and humor, his lyricism, his mastery of language, his ability to excite, surprise, move, and in the widest sense of the word, entertain audiences. He is the greatest of poets, but he is essentially a dramatic poet. Though his plays have much to offer to readers, they exist fully only in performance. In these volumes, we offer individual introductions, notes on language and on specific points of the text, suggestion for further reading, and information about how each work has been edited. In addition, we include accounts of the ways in which successive generations of interpreters and audiences have responded to challenges and rewards offered by the plays. The Penguin Shakespeare series inspired to remove obstacles to understanding and to make pleasurable the reading of the work of the man who has done more than most to make us understand what it is to be human. Stanley Wells. That was William Shakespeare's classic and general introduction in Romeo and Juliet. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I am trying my best with these readings, as time is quite difficult to find, but I genuinely find this to be very, very fun to do, and I hope that you are enjoying reading along with me and listening as I am reading to you. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you stick for more videos that I can try to